it is delightful, I do have to say. So I want to start off right off the bat by being clear that I am not an expert in yoga. I am not an instructor. And by some account, I haven't even been practicing that very long. Though I do have a daily practice. I've been practicing for about 5 years. For me, it's a spiritual and physical practice. But also, I want to say, I'm not an expert on Eastern spirituality. I know some about it. I have studied it. I personally am enriched by Buddhist teachings. And I say both of these things because what I want to avoid and also discourage is this easy slide into thinking that because I have a Western practice of yoga, or because I have my own personal and Western understanding of Buddhism, that I can claim either of these cultures or claim anything of these cultures. So I want to avoid cultural appropriation and say that my understanding of yoga is very Western and very modern. And my understanding of Buddhism is also very Western and very modern. And so I want to acknowledge what I'm learning from those practices and acknowledge how I'm growing from those practices without attempting to claim either or any of those cultures. That being said, I will say, this is going to be an interesting back and forth for me of trying to go between what's in my head and what's not on the paper in front of me. So a little bit about yoga. So yoga is a 5,000-year-old practice. It developed, we think, in Southeast Asia. Traditionally, it is handed down from a guru to students through generations, and that is how it travels. And traditionally, it has been practiced as both simultaneously physical and spiritual practice. Because traditionally, I'm saying traditionally a lot, those are not seen as separate. Those are seen as very much interconnected, intertwined, linked, and inseparable. So 5,000-year-old spiritual and physical practice. And what it can do, some of what people get from it is that it can increase physical flexibility. Yoga can strengthen our muscles. It can relax and calm us both physically and mentally, and is used sometimes to center our thoughts. And over the past few years, yoga has definitely grown in popularity in this country. In the last Yoga World Survey of Yoga, they found that 20.4 million Americans practice yoga, which is about 8.7%. But that's a nearly 30% increase from the last time that they did that survey 4 years previously. So 20.4 million people, adults in the US, practice yoga. And among those who don't, 44% say that they are interested in practicing or learning more about it. So it is increasing in its connection to people and its relevance. More and more people are making yoga a part of their lives. So I wonder how many of us in the room, I already said that I do, how many of us in the room practice some kind of yoga? Holy moly. Okay, a lot of people. Every age. This is excellent. Okay, so according to the yoga study, this is who does yoga in this country. 82.2% are women, and 17.8% are men. The majority of today's practitioners are between the ages of 18 and 44. So like 63% are between the ages of 18 and 44. Regarding length of practice, 38.4% have practiced yoga for a year or less. That's a lot. 40% are new, only a year. Another 28.9, let's just say 29%, have practiced for 1 to 3 years. And then another 33% have practiced for 3 years or longer. So it's sort of evenly split between a year, this 1 and 3 years, and then people who are 3 years or longer. 44.8% of those people who practice consider themselves beginners. So by all measures, I am, or by those measures, I am a typical yogi in this country. I'm female, I am between 18 and 44, somewhere between 18 and 44. I'm in my 40s. I'm female, I'm in my 40s, I've been practicing for more than 3 years, and I consider myself a beginner. So I'm a typical American yogi. The motivations for what brings people to yoga, though, are also really interesting. So people's motivations are a little bit spiritual, or maybe not so much spiritual, but mental. But mostly, the motivations are physical. So the top five reasons that people give for what attracts them to yoga. 78% said it was for flexibility. 62% say for general physical conditioning. 60% say it's for stress relief. So these are obviously more than 100, right? So you could have more than one reason. 59% say it is to improve overall health. And 55% say it is for physical fitness. So flexibility, physical fitness, general conditioning, improving overall health. Not a lot there about connecting to my deeper spiritual self and being one with the universe. Although, I will tell you now, and I will tell you later, that can happen. When I first started yoga, I did not have high-minded, lofty, spiritual reasons for why I was doing it. And I had actually had some not great experiences with yoga in the past. So when I first practiced yoga, I did it because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. I had been a runner for fitness, not for competition, although I was very competitive with myself in my running. So I was a runner because I thought that there was something tough about running. Right? It was hardcore, serious, I lifted weights. I felt like I was like a tough guy because I'd be out running every morning, not stretching in the gym, wearing like spandex. But my hardcore, serious running every morning led to an injury that made it impossible, painful, so impossible, to continue running. And I was advised by my doctor to stop. And I will admit, I didn't write this down in my notes. Even though I was advised by my doctor to stop, I still did it. I still did it because it was tough. And I was very competitive with my body, right? It was really all about whipping my body into shape and mind over matter, and my mind physically controlling and wrangling my body into submission. Because that is what physical fitness was for me before yoga. So I couldn't run anymore, and at the same time, I ran across this Groupon for a month of yoga at a place that was near where I worked. So I can't run, I have this Groupon, and I figured, what the heck. I was pretty skeptical because I had tried yoga in the past, and they were not great experiences. I would go, and I couldn't get the moves, I didn't really understand, I couldn't figure it out fast enough, and I couldn't make my body do those twisty moves. My body didn't do that. And it certainly didn't look like the other bodies there. I'm short and stout and kind of stiff. And I'm in this room with all these women, and it was mostly women. They're tall and lithe, and they're bendy. So my body's not doing it. And I barely broke a sweat, so it didn't even feel like real exercise. So I was very skeptical of yoga going in. But I have this Groupon for a month of unlimited. And I can't run. I'm not supposed to run. So I'm still doing it. So I go, and I have to say, if it had only been one class, I probably would have gone to the one class and rolled my eyes and done something else. But it was a month, so I tried a few, and I kept going back. And eventually, I found myself at an early morning Ashtanga yoga class. So the instructor, she looked a little bit like me. She was short, she was very muscular, so she was very, but also like lean, like limp. And she was very strong. And so she starts leading the class through these exercises. And occasionally she would sort of gently guide me into a pose. But really, she just led the class with this very brisk series of movements, like non-stop. They just were moving for the entire hour. And I could hardly keep up with all of my hardcore strength, like weightlifting and yoga and thinking that I'm so physically fit. I could barely keep up with this yoga class. So I was definitely humbled by that experience. And then after the class, the instructor came over and she talked to me. She found out a little bit about my history with yoga, my experiences. She told me about Ashtanga and about how it worked. She invited me to come back, which was really important. And she also she was very serene and calm and very welcoming. So I did come back, and that sort of began my journey with yoga. And in a lot of ways, my journey with yoga and sort of finding yoga was a lot like finding Unitarian Universalism. I was skeptical because I had had a prior experience that was less than fulfilling. But I went because I was open to the experience. Somebody got my story and told me theirs. And she invited me back. And so finding yoga was like finding Unitarian Universalism in that it was as if, for both of these things, it was as if this world had opened up and things clicked into place, and everybody that I talked to, I wanted to tell about it. Have you had that experience with anything? Have you had that experience with Unitarian Universalism? Yes. It's like, so I had already found Unitarian Universalism, so I knew what that was. But to find it again, and I would, but also because I had had this experience before and knew what it was, I also knew not to do that with all of the force that I felt it with. So I would gently tell people about it. I would encourage people to come, but I would definitely keep going. So finding yoga for me was like finding Unitarian Universalism, and it opened up a whole world of being for me. Totally off my script. I have no idea what I intended to say next. But I know that I wanted to talk about some of the lessons, right? Some of the lessons that I got from yoga. And what about this experience was so transformative and so life-changing. For me, the practice really is different every day. And so from day to day, I don't know exactly what I will get. And sometimes I go there expecting something. Sometimes I know to go there not expecting anything. But I think the three things that I want to tell you about that come with me, that travel with me through this practice is about balance and about breathing and about focus. And so the balance part is one of the biggest parts, and it's the biggest surprise for me about yoga. And some of that balance is like standing on one leg balance, or standing on your head balance. I can stand on one leg, I cannot stand on my head, maybe next month, that will happen for me. Some of it is about the physical, like the balancing, but some of it is this broader way of thinking about balance, thinking about myself, balance in the world. It's like the yin-yang of forces. So you go and they tell you to be focused on the moves, but also to empty your mind. And so when I first started, I would call these the contradictions, all of the contradictions of yoga. But as they have unfolded for me, I embrace them now in balance, of being attentive, but also of letting go. Physically, they tell us all the time to like ground down, but also to reach up, right? That when you're doing that reach move, you're like seated, but you're also reaching for the sky. There are all these poses where you're like pushing in one way and then you're pulling in another. There's that balance. And we get that a little bit in other parts of our lives too, right? We have roots and wings, right? We're grounded, but we're stretching out. We sing all the time about our roots holding us close, but our wings setting us free. So there's that balance, right, of like closeness and letting go. There's this balance in the world of what I can control and what I can't. So, and this really reflects my own theology, because I know that in the world there is so much that I cannot control outside of me, around me, but I also know that what I do matters, and that I should do it, and that I should behave in a way that reflects that what I do matters in the world, right? So there's this balance of letting go, of acknowledging that I can't control anything. Or there's so many things that I can't control, but also acknowledging and owning that the things that I can control, the things that I do, that I can have an impact on, I ought to. So what I do has like ripples of impact in the world, and some of them I'm aware of. But eventually, even my own ripples, even the ripples that I start in the world, I don't have any control of them past a certain point. So for me, that was like one of the balances, the lesson of balance that I got from yoga that works in my practice, but also that works in my life. So that's balance. The second thing is breathing, because breathing is what actually helps to make that balance happen. Some of it is physical, right? When you breathe out, it like physically releases tension in your body. It allows you to stretch a little bit further, and it also slows things down. We heard last week in the discussion of prayer that deep breathing affects the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system controls things like digestion, but it also is in charge of recuperation and healing, and is activated when we feel stressed, when we're in a stressful situation. So breathing helps us to manage stressful situations, and it sort of interrupts that fight or flight reaction that we want to have, because it just slows everything down. And it allows us to be open to creativity and to intuition. There is an American yoga practitioner who's pretty famous, Sean Korn. And so one of the things that she says about yoga, she's a yogi and she's an activist, she says, breathe and everything changes. And I love that quote because by themselves, both of those things are true. Everything changes all the time. We know that. And breathing is a thing that we do. As long as we are alive, we are breathing. And we don't even have to think about it. It just happens. But putting those two things together is also a reminder of the ways that they can be related. It's a reminder that things will change, that this will pass, to not hang on to anything because everything is changing, and that's okay. And it's a reminder that breathing helps us flow with that change. Because just as our breath is changing, the universe is changing, and just as the universe is changing, our breath is changing. So it's a reminder for us to slow down and to breathe and to be okay with everything changing. We've got balance, and we've got breath, and we've got focus. And I don't remember off the top of my head what I wanted to say about focus. So I'm going to look again through my pages and see where I want to say about focus. Focus, focus. Oh, focus. Focus is an important part. It's the biggest part. Almost as big as breathing and almost as big as balance. But the focus is about the discipline. Because my approach to yoga is as a daily discipline. And what that means for me is that I show up on the mat every morning. So, what that means for me in theory is that I show up on the mat every morning. Last week, 2 weeks ago, when I was preaching up here, I talked about Freedom Summer. And I talked about those people who showed up in solidarity with other people. A spiritual practice, a spiritual discipline, is our opportunity to show up for ourselves. And that is just as important because it allows us to go deeper into ourselves for understanding, maybe for healing, and then from that place to connect outward with more strength and more power. So it is important to show up for other people, but it is equally important in a spiritual discipline to show up for ourselves. And I will also say, it's a daily discipline. It means that I show up on the mat every day. That is a deep and internal intention. I don't practice yoga every single day. It's 5:30 in the morning when I practice. I didn't practice today. So it also means recognizing that though there is a deep intention to do it, the reality of life, the reality of the world, is that I won't always show up the way that I mentally intend, and that's okay too. It's about being gentle with myself and forgiving myself when I sometimes fall short. And that is useful for ourselves, but it also is useful if we're thinking about how we connect with others, because it means when we can recognize in ourselves that we sometimes fall short, we can then recognize and embrace that in other people. And I'm saying embrace that in other people and now forgive, because it's not necessarily a thing that has to be forgiven, because we know it will happen. It just will. Like the sun rises and it rains and grass grows. It will happen that sometimes people will fall short, and sometimes we will fall short, and people won't always be able to do what they intend. So my discipline, and recognizing that I don't always reach where I want to with my discipline, is for me an opportunity to embrace for myself and to embrace for others that we will sometimes fall short. We say in my practice that practice makes practice. Not practice makes perfect, right? Because there's not like some perfect end. But practice makes practice. That it is about the process and the journey and the constant unfolding of what happens. So those are my 3 big lessons from yoga. It's about breath and focus and balance. Having some perspective on life, having some perspective on the universe, being open to what is creative outside of ourselves, recognizing where we have control and where we can let go. And then just start breathing deeply and flowing with the universe. Because sometimes you won't be able to print out that sermon that you wrote with all of the words that were perfectly put together. But that's okay too. Because there are a room full of people who don't need all of the perfect words put together in all of the perfect ways that you planned it. So for me and for you, may we all have balance and focus and creativity